Hi, Math 10C students. Welcome to our 6.5 lesson on slope point form of the equation for a linear function. So if you remember from the last two lessons on 6.4, we were using something called slope intercept form. Today we're going to look at a different form that an equation can be wrote in. So in this case, we today are going to be looking at something called slope point form. So the name kind of gives you a bit of an indication as to what the equation will look like. If you remember in slope intercept form, that form we had the slope as our m value and the y-intercept as our b value. In this different form called slope point form, we're going to be given two pieces of information that we can tell from the name. We will be given the slope, which again is represented by m, and we will be given a point on the graph. In other words, some value of x1, y1. So this is the equation that we use for slope point form. Y minus y1 equals m bracket x minus x1 close bracket. So we're going to talk about what each of those values represent. But again, in this equation, we don't change the y value necessarily unless we're trying to solve something. And we don't change the x value, but what we are going to be inputting or looking at is our m value, our y1 value, and our x1 value. So remember, when we're finding slope, we need 2 points. This is going to give us one of the 2 points, and then we can use the slope to find another point on the graph. Now, there's one really important thing to note with this formula. You'll notice that there's a negative sign in between the y1, the y and the y1, and a negative sign in between the x and the x1. So I'm just going to make a little note here, and I'd like you to add this into your own notes as well. So we can say that since the formula has negative signs, the values in the formula appear to have opposite signs as the actual value. So what I mean by that, if we take a look back at this equation again, if I have, for example, y minus 1, what that means is my y 2.1 is actually going to be at positive 1 because, again, I'm not taking into the negative sign as part of the general formula. Therefore, if it shows minus 1, it actually means plus 1. And then maybe for this part, I would have mx plus 3. So if this was a plus sign in the given equation, instead of a minus sign, what that tells me is that it's the actual opposite value. So if it said plus 3 here, that means that my x1 value is actually the opposite, which would be a negative 3. So let's take a look at this example here as our signs are actually written opposite. So in the example, for part A, it asks me to write the slope and the coordinates of a point that lay on the line, y plus 3 equals negative 3 over 4, x minus 2. And then they ask me to graph the line. So remember, there's a few things that I can pull from this right away because I'm using this y minus y1 equals m x minus x1 form of this equation. So right off the bat, nice and easy, I can pull out my m value or my slope value. So my slope value is negative 3 over 4. And then I have to pull away my y1 value and my x1 value. So remember, this is the general equation for slope point form. So I'm going to compare this to what I've been given above here. So this says y plus 3, this says minus y1. So if this is a plus 3, that actually means that it's a -3, and that's how they came up with the plus sign there. So that means that my y1 value is actually -3. And then if I take a look at my x value here, it says x minus 2. Okay, that is written in the same form as it is below. That means that 2 there is actually a positive. So what I can deduce from that line is that my slope, again, is -3/4. And I have the ordered pair 2, -3 from my x and y values given here. So now that I have that information, it's kind of shown to you on the graph, so I'll go below. But what you would do with that information if you had a blank graph is I would start by substituting that point in. So I would draw my point at 2 and -3. So 2, -3 like they have here. And then we can use the slope of the line to draw another point. So they gave me -3, 4. So that means either that I can go -3/4 or 3/-4. Okay, in this case, they went with the second here. So they went up 1, 2, 3, and then to the left 1, 2, 3, 4. They drew the second point and then they connected our line. So again, the really important part and the kind of tricky part from this lesson to note is that whatever sign is shown in our equation, we have to compare it to the original to figure out what the value is. So if this says +3, it actually means it's a -3. And if this says -2, it's the same form here. So we're just looking at the number 2, which is a +2 in this case. So I will come back to that point again as we go through this lesson. At the top of page 347, there are some check questions. So I suggest that you pause the video right now, and then I will go through the answers with you. But again, I suggest that you try this on your own, so pause the video right now, and then we'll go through these questions together. All right, so let's go through the answers for these check questions. It says here, circle the number below that is the slope of the line y minus 1 equals -2 x plus 4. So remember, we're looking for the slope or the m value. That is right here. So that means that number 2 is going to be my correct answer for this one. The next one said circle the coordinates of one point on the line y minus 1 equals -2x plus 4. So let's look at these points again. Remember, this is my x1 and this is my y1. But remember, the original form was like this. X minus 1. So remember, if this is a negative sign, that means that the y value is actually a positive one. So those ones are incorrect. It's going to be one of these. And if this is a +4, it means that it's actually a -4, because remember, it's minus a negative, which shows as a positive. So that means that selection number 4 are my correct ordered pairs. In the next one, they've asked you to write the slope and the coordinates that lay on this point, and then we're going to be graphing it after. So it says rewrite the equation to match the slope point form using subtraction. So again, we want to compare that equation to our previous one. So if this is a +1, remember +1 is the same as actually a -1. Okay, so now we can take all of our points from here. y1 is a -1, our m is 3, and our x value is +2. That means the slope is 3. And my 2 points, my x comes first, of course, 2 and -1. So those are my ordered pairs. So for part B, now they've asked us to graph this line. We can do that because we know we have a point on the graph. So our point will be 2 and -1. Our slope is 3. So remember, any slope of a whole number, I can write it as that whole number over 1. So the slope I can write as 3/1. That helps me figure out I have a rise of 3, a run of 1. So I'm going to start by plotting point P, so at 2 and -1. And then I'm going to move 3 units up and 1 unit to the right to draw my point. So I'm going to move 1, 2, 3 up, 1 to the right. And remember, if you wanted to add another point to this, you could also, 3 over 1 is the same thing as negative 3 over negative 1. So you could also go down 1, 2, 3, and then 1 to the left if you wanted to make a better line. And then, of course, connect those lines using a ruler or some sort of straight edge. I think my pen's still a little wet. So a little bit. There we go. All right. There is my graph. So it's as easy as that. Let's go on to the next example. So for the next example at the top of page 343, they ask us to write an equation for this line and then write the equation in slope-intercept form. Okay, so let's start by writing the equation of the line in slope-point form. Okay, so first thing I need to do is figure out what the slope is. So let's take a look. The slope is, if I go from the second point to the first point, it's 1, 2, 3, 4. We have a positive 4 over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, negative 6. Or if you did it the other way, if you went from this one to that one, you would have had negative 4 over 6. So same thing. And let's put this in lowest terms. So that's going to be negative 2/3. Okay. So I'm just going to make a little note here. My m, or my slope, is negative 2/3. And you can choose either of those points as the point for your slope point form. It really doesn't matter. You're going to get two different equations in the end, but as you read in the example, it says you can have more than one equation for slope point form. You can only have one equation for slope intercept form. So slope intercept form, no matter which points you use, you're going to get the same equation. But for slope point form, depending on what you choose as your point, you can get two different equations. So I'm going to show you the two different ones you would end up with. Now, if I use my top point as my point, the coordinates for that one are negative 3 and 5. Or if I use my bottom points, that one would be 3 and a positive 1. So I'll show you for both of these what your form would look like. So remember, y minus y1 equals mx minus x1. Okay, so that's the general formula I'm going to use, and I will show you how to do it with both of these points. So if I use these top 2 points as my numbers, that means I have y. Okay, now the 5 is my y value, and it's a positive 5, so I just go y minus 5, okay, because I'm not going to change the sign on this at all. My slope is negative 2 over 3, and then I have x. Now this is a negative 3. That means that I'm going to be minusing a negative 3, which at the end of the day is the same thing as adding 3. So I'm just going to erase this directly in here now that you know why I'm doing it, and that one will be plus 3. Okay, so that's one way that I can write the slope point intercept. I'm going to do it now using the other 2 points. So I have y. My y value here is 1, and it's positive 1, so y minus 1, negative 2 over 3, x, and I have a positive 3. So again, I'm going to go minus 3. I'm not going to do any changing to the signs. So this is the other way you could write it. Both of these would be correct. So for some of these questions, there could be more than one correct answer, depending on if they give you more than one point on the graph to choose from. Now, the last part asks you to find the slope-intercept form. So that was, if you recall, y equals mx plus b. So there's two different ways you could do it. We already have the slope, and you could eyeball the line and say, okay, I know where it's going through. Or we could use one of these two forms and then rearrange it to solve for y. So at the bottom here, they've shown it to you in this way. So they've taken the first of those two equations that we had, okay? And then what they're going to do here is expand this term in. So remember, this 2/3 goes to each of those terms, okay? We end up with this once it's expanded in. Okay, and then we have to isolate the y, so let's move the 5 to the other side. The opposite of subtracting 5 is adding 5, so we add 5 to the other side. Simplify these two terms to get positive 3, and there you go. Now we have it in slope-intercept form. Okay, so remember, a line can be represented by many slope-point equations, but only one slope-intercept equation, okay? So if it doesn't matter, I could have used the second version of that and gotten the same answer. So I'm going to encourage you now to pause the video and try the check questions on page 349. So please pause the video now, and I'm going to go on to explain how to solve for these questions. Okay, so the 2 points that I've been given are point A, which is 1 and 4, and point B, which is 2 and 2. So remember, I can do this in two ways. I can do rise over run, or I can do y2 minus y1 equals x2 minus x1. Really doesn't matter which way you do it. I'll just simplify it and do rise over run. So if I'm going from A to B, I've moved 1, 2 down, so negative 2, and 1 to the right. So I end up with negative 2 over 1, or negative 2 as my answer for m. So that's my slope. Now the next part says use the slope point form of the equation. Remember, that's y minus y1 equals mx minus x1. And I'm going to substitute the coordinates of point. Again, it doesn't matter. You can choose either one. I'll just choose point A because it comes first, which is 1 and 4. I'll show you both of the equations at the bottom though, because you could have used B, which was 2 and 2. It'll give you a different formula, but still a correct answer. So if I used A as my point, my x1 is 1, my y1 is 4, and if you remember from above, my slope is negative 2. So when I put them into the formula, y minus 4, negative 2, x minus 1. So that one was nice. I didn't have to change the signs of anything. So y minus 4 equals negative 2, x minus 1. Now, if I used 2 and 2 as my points, I would have come up with a different but still correct equation, which would have been y minus 2 equals negative 2, x minus 2. Okay, so both of these equations would be correct for slope point form, okay, because they've given us 2 points on the graph above. And then the next part, they've asked us to write this in slope-intercept form. So the nice thing about slope point form is that I can use it in order to solve for slope-intercept form. So I'm just copying over my previous answer. Okay, so they've asked me to expand. So I'll keep it the same on that side. Negative 2 times x equals negative 2x. Negative 2 times negative 1 equals positive 2. Now I need to isolate the y, so I need to bring the, oh, sorry, that's a bit blurry. There we go. So I need to bring my 4 to the other side. The opposite of subtracting 4 is adding 4. So if I add 4 on this side, that gets rid of this. Just recopy that out. Plus 4. Okay, and then simplify. So combine any like terms. Negative 2x plus 6. Okay, so my final answer in slope-intercept form is y equals negative 2x plus 6. All right, so you can see the two different forms of it. We have one more example to get through. So now it's bringing in what we've learned in previous lessons. I believe this was lesson 6.2 on parallel, and then we'll look at perpendicular lines. So if you remember, lines that are parallel have the same slope. So I'm just going to remind you, if they're parallel, that means they have the same slope. So they said the graph of y equals negative 1/2 x plus 2 is given. They want us to write an equation for the line that passes through A, 4 and 3. Okay, so those are going to be my points, and is parallel to this line. Okay, so there's two pieces of information that I need to take from that. The first one is it said it's parallel. That means that its slope needs to be the same. So when I'm rewriting this in my slope, my slope point form, which is again this, that means that my slope or my m value has to be the same, which is going to be -1/2. So I'm just going to do the work here off to the side. All right, so that means my m has to be -1/2. Okay, and they gave me the 2 points. So x1, y1. My x1 point that they gave me was 4. My y1 point that they gave me was 3. So let's plug all that back into that slope point form. Y minus 3 equals -1/2 x minus 4. Okay, so remember again, good way to check, the signs here should be opposite what they were here. That means that we put in the correct information. So this would be a line that is parallel to this line. All right, so there's a check question at the bottom. I'm going to do this one with you. So you can pause the video if you'd like, but I feel like some of you might need a little bit more help working through this one. So they've asked us to write an equation for a line that passes through this point. So remember, we're going to be using slope point form, but it's perpendicular to this equation. So if you remember from couple lessons ago, so last week, perpendicular lines have slopes that are negative reciprocals. So if the slope of our line in this form is 2/3, what is the negative reciprocal of 2/3? Well, flip it. Flip it makes the reciprocal. And if this was a positive, that means this is a negative. So the slope of this new line is going to be -3/2. The next thing we need to figure out is what is my x1 value, what is my y1 value, and then I can input it into the formula. X1 is -4, as I was given right above here. Y1 is a +1. And then I'm always going to kind of start with this original form just so you can see y minus y1 equals mx minus x1. So let's input our numbers now. Y, okay, that's a +1. That means this can be -1. Then I'm going to input my m value, -3/2 x, and this is a -4. That means it's going to be the same thing as minusing a -4, and to minus a -4 is to add 4. And there is my final answer. So this line is perpendicular to this line. Okay, remember perpendicular, they have negative reciprocals for their, negative reciprocals for their slope value. So now I would like you to stop the video, complete the questions. The practice ones go from page 351 all the way to the end of 354. I know that it seems like a lot of work, but it's actually very quick to work through. And you don't have to do 6B because it's asking you to do the same thing as 6A, and I'm not really sure what happened with that question. So you can omit 6B from those practice questions, and best of luck to you. Bye-bye.